and welcome to the Literary Sipper. I'm Amber Beauty Hill, your host, and today we're going to be talking about intergenerational friendships and connections and how important it is to keep friends of all ages, no matter how old you are. If you scroll on social media for any length of time, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, you'll see reels or short videos that are filled with pitting generations against each other. Millennials versus Gen X versus Boomer versus Gen Z versus Gen Alpha. The little phrasings or the music that summons us or the dances that we do or why we're better and they're worse or why we're stronger and they're weaker. And it just solidifies the divisions between these generations. But having friends and community that stretch between ages is so important to battle isolation. And also to battle confirmation bias, which is so pervasive, especially in this election season. If we only surround each other, or if we only surround ourselves with people who are like us, whether that is their age group or gender or ethnicity or fill in the blank, then we're just sort of confirming what we already know. And that may make us feel good for a moment. It really does feel good to be right sometimes. But it doesn't broaden our sense of what it means to be human. So here's the thing. If your book club or your writing group or your drawing class all have members around the same age, there may be a lot of factors contributing to that, right? That are beyond your control. The time of day something is offered, or when your availability is in terms of like your child's schedule or your caretaking schedule or your work schedule. But is there a way to challenge yourself to spread out a bit in your creative journey? I think it's so essential for artists to be influenced by a varied voice so that you can look at the culture that you're trying to channel in a different way. And you can start to see what is actually human experience and what is divided by culture or age or ethnicity, and really have a sense of how that might affect your art. If you are just being critiqued by the same age group of people, then they are reading the same things. They think about language in the same way. I was recently in a critique group for a children's book that I'm working on, and I used the word crazy in one of my manuscripts. And of course, anybody who's my age or older, this word doesn't really make anyone blink. But for the younger people in this critique group, they kind of are suspect of that word. And they really want you to think about how you're using it and challenge yourself to think of other words that can be used in place of it. And it's not to say that there isn't a time or place to use the word crazy, but does it need to be in that way, in that vernacular, in that moment, with children? Or is there a way to look at vocabulary and the impact that it has and think to ourselves, how can I change it? If I change the word, will it change the crux of the story? Then maybe I won't change it. But can I change the word and broaden my audience and not lose some magic in the meantime? And I think that's a great challenge. And this is, of course, what comedians have been struggling with. And you hear a lot of comedians talking about the audience has changed, the audience has changed. But I don't necessarily think that that's true. I think the easy joke has changed. And maybe challenging ourselves to create in any environment starts with reaching audience members who we have never reached before. And the way to do that is to start thinking about the groups that you're involved in, the communities that you're a part of. And can you ask yourself deeper questions about your work, thinking about how your work might affect generations who view it? Can it push you and can it push your empathy forward to be surrounded by lots of different age groups? Artists and creatives, we surround ourselves with newness and novelty A lot. We love to explore. We are seekers. We want to know new things. We like to begin a lot of projects. We like to know what scene is cool and what people are listening to or reading or dressing. We're very interested in sort of the fringes and what is it that pushes culture forward. Can you find a sense of play with those generations and those new sounds and scenes, and including the older generations? Like if you're only surrounding yourself with those younger than you, and you're not really interested in those older than you, then you're also not seeing where your influences might have come from. And it's preventing you from doing a deep dive into something that you're really passionate about. So, for example, if you are a musician and you haven't studied people, you haven't looked at classical music, you haven't looked at jazz, you haven't looked at Broadway, you haven't looked at these heights of acoustic songwriting or world music, and if you haven't sort of thought what happened in the 60s, 70s, 19th century, if you haven't really gone backwards, then you haven't really gone deep either. So it's important to like think about the generations that you're friends with as channels to these other places that maybe you can allow some of that flow to your flow state. You can allow some of those things in and their influences in. And not to say that you have to think everything that they say is gospel. If they love, there's a wonderful, it reminds me of this wonderful article by Zadie Smith about Joni Mitchell and how for years she just kind of resisted Joni Mitchell. And she just thought like, that's just this, white folk singer. And like, what does she have to say to me? And she doesn't end up listening to her until I think she's in her 30s. And then all of a sudden she's thinking to herself, how did I miss this whole voice, this poetic person? And it's not to say she's this uber Joni fan right now, but it is the impact of being open to listening that changed her somehow and then pushed her, of course, as a writer and her empathy forward in understanding it and then ultimately writing a wonderful essay about it. Because there's a lot of resistance in generational interchange at the moment because of all of these ways that we are pitted against each other. And we want to be tapping into the zeitgeist of the moment. We always want to be aware of our present situation, but we also have this fear of being left behind. And so if we attach ourselves sometimes to older generations, then we sometimes feel like we are left behind because we're putting on these pairs of glasses that are so old and already see the world a certain way, but they don't see it like you do. And that's the important thing to understand is that if you have older people in your book club, they're going to come at a book in a very different way because they're going to come at it from a very different history. And you can open your ears and open your eyes in those ways to check out the recommendations from these people and to say, like, how does this fit into my sphere now? How does this make me move forward? And is there something to learn? And the flip side, of course, being making sure you have friends who are younger than you, making sure you have friends who are 10 years younger than you, 20 years younger than you. So you don't lose sight of what it means to be a young mom, for example, balancing art and childcare, or trying to balance a full-time job and your childcare and have time to be creative. If you're past your child living at home, if you're an empty nester, we sort of forget what those young, bleary-eyed days were. I mean, we kind of think we remember, but at the same time, you're in a writing group with this young person and you're like, why can't you get your pages done? Well, because they haven't slept in a week, and being able to hear those stories without judgment, without having to voice your own experience, but just listen and with an empathetic ear to say, I hear you, I understand, it is hard, but keep going. I mean, are you asking questions of people who are younger than you? Are you saying, what should I be listening to? What should I be reading? What should I be watching? What am I missing because I'm in my comfort zone? I'm reading in my comfort zone. I'm watching the same Netflix shows as my friends who happen to be the same age as I am. And, we're in these spheres all the time. Push yourself out of it. I mean, we spoke in last week's episode, or I guess it was 2 weeks ago, about reading outside your comfort zone, but it's also about just pushing yourself out of what you usually know and looking at what's popular, and especially with people who are in your circles. I love to ask my 15-year-old son, what should I be listening to that I'm not listening to? And then to hear him explain why an artist is important to him or why I might like an artist. He really thinks about the music that I do listen to. And he says, if you like person A, you might really like person B. And then listen to it and revisit that question with him and say, I did listen to Tyler, the Creator's new album, and this is what I think about it. And see what they say and how they respond to the way you're processing that art and that information. And then use it to push your own art forward, to push your own creativity forward. And look for places where people are asking you what you're listening to, what you're reading, how your writing process is going, so that you can offer your perspective and hopefully help them to push forward. Because like it or not, you're really old to somebody and you're really young to somebody right at the moment that you are in right now. I am lucky. I taught for many years and I get to follow my former students' adventures on Facebook. And they keep me young still, even though now, I'm 51 and now, some of my students are in their 40s, 30s, 20s, and they still push me in a lot of ways to stay connected. And shout out to one of my former students, Catherine Hughes, who's always giving me book recommendations. And I love that because when she loves something with a capital L, then I definitely will check it out. And that is so powerful to me because when we tell you, I love this thing and you might like it too. Isn't that just like the sweetest love note you can get from someone? There's a meme that's going around or has gone around in the past where if you see someone reading your favorite book, it's like an invitation to be friends with that person. It's knowing that you're not alone. And I feel that way when my students reach out to me through literature. And it's my way of saying thank you to them. And it's also their way of saying thank you to me. And one of my writing groups that I've been a part of has women who are much older than me, and I love being with them. And one of my former book clubs in Stoneham, Massachusetts was women who are predominantly older than me, and I loved being with them too, because it is so powerful to be in community with people who are wiser, with people who are still excited by the things that you're excited by, books, art, music, whatever it is, and you're still moving forward in it and you don't seem so silly because they're taking it seriously still. So you should take it seriously still. And as I've been writing for kids lately and putting my hand in some children's books, I'm connecting with younger people as well. Like knowing what books little children are attracted to is so interesting to me and fascinating, and how it's changed even from when my sons were 3 and 4 to now. Like, what books are they pulling off of shelves? I was in the library today and I watched a 4-year-old systematically go through the shelves in the children's section, looking at books, putting them back. And all he's doing is looking at the cover, right? He's not sitting and reading them. He's looking at that cover and he's putting it back, and he's looking at the cover and he's putting it back. And when he finally made his selection, which was not a book I had ever heard of before, but I wrote down the title because I said to myself, I have to look at this book now because of all of those books. I watched him pick and choose about 10 books that he said no to. It was called Mario Makes a Move. And it looks to be like about a squirrel, but that was it. Now, I don't know if he likes Mario because of Nintendo, or his name is Mario, or his cat's name is Mario. I don't even know if he could read the word Mario, and he just liked the idea of a squirrel jumping off a tree. But it's fascinating to me to see what propels selection, whether it's selection as a 4-year-old or selection as a 74-year-old. Your life will be richer and deeper and more interesting the more you connect. And it is so important to connect with a variety of generations to not only keep classics alive in terms of literature, but to keep the canon of literature moving forward. And I think you can apply that classic and canon to any art form. The classics of oil painting technique to the modern techniques of painting or photography or graphic design currently. The classic techniques of recording to recording through music software like Ableton. You are constantly learning and constantly measuring what came before with what's coming next to where you are in the present. And I urge you to commit more time to making sure that you're making more intergenerational connections in your life, especially in this time of year. In the election season, it's more important to connect than disconnect. It's more important to see how we are alike than how we are different. And that's very hard for me to say, but it is the truth. And I hope you're well, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening to The Literary Sipper. I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new. If you did, please subscribe and leave a rating and review if you're feeling especially generous. Until next time, keep reading, keep writing, and keep putting your voice in the world. It's waiting for you.